to block out a section of time to listen to a couple of folks talk, but we're really glad that you're here today. And I want to tell you who I am, introduce Mark to you, tell you a little bit about what we're not going to do today and what we are going to try to accomplish in this 45-minute to 50-minute webinar this afternoon. So my name is Doug Hoffman. I'm the Executive Director of NORMI, National Organization of Remediators and Mold Inspectors. If you don't know who we are, you can go to our website at normi.org. We are, for your information, the only approved training provider for the 5 states that license mold professionals, mold assessors and mold remediators. We're the only organization that's approved for all 5 states. And so we've been training since 2004 when Louisiana started with its licensing law. And I think we've helped a lot of folks understand the right way to do remediation and sanitization, how to assess environments, and to deal with indoor air quality issues like the one that we're going to talk about today. So welcome. And I want to introduce to you a very good friend of mine, Mark Meyer. We've known each other a really long time, and I'm going to let him talk a little bit about who he is and what his credentials are. But our relationship started out as a products connection, basically, between some products that he was selling. But he's not here today to talk about products. He's here because of his expertise in understanding the sanitization side of this industry from a chemistry standpoint. And so I'm really, really happy to have him here today. Mark, do you want to tell him a little bit about who you are?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Meyer, and I'm Vice President of the EnviroGuard Division of Paradigm Labs. Like Doug, I've been in and around this industry since the early 2000s and have really focused on working with professionals like yourselves in the field and making sure that whatever's being done is being done as safely as possible with proper PPE, the proper selection of chemistry based upon soil load and based upon the types of claims that you need or want to make in the field. So I'm here to work with NORMI and provide any assistance that I can to you in making some of those decisions.
Thank you, Mark. And we're really excited to share this information with you. We've been working on this for a couple of days, and as we all know, we've been dealing with a moving target. And all of us are dealing with, in a lot of, as they say, uncharted territory. But I want to tell you what we're not going to do. We don't want to talk about specific products today. NORMI is a product neutral organization. We do recommend specific products, and those are specifically for our NORMI certificates of sanitization and insured warranties and those sorts of things. So we do have a place for that, but that's not where we are today. We're not here to talk about numbers and pricing and all that sort of thing. What we're here to talk about is very specific, and it's to deal with primarily a specific sanitization protocol, as I said, that we've been training on for a long time to deal with this particular problem, just like you would deal with normal issues that we might have in our indoor environments. And of course, our goal is that the more people that we can educate on this subject, the more people that will be educated on it when you go out in the workplace and start working with folks, and everybody's going to end up with a cleaner, healthier living environment. And that's really our goal, to reduce allergens and the kinds of microbial contaminations that we're talking about at this very specific time. So let me show you our presentation, and then I'll tell you what we're going to cover. And this is our presentation today. We're going to talk about what we know, and I'll just tell you that we're not going to talk about all the things you've already heard about, the numbers of cases there are, the number of deaths, those sorts of things, but we do have some specific things we want to tell you that we know about this virus and the way we can deal with it because of our sanitization protocol. We're going to talk about a sanitization protocol and give you a very simple, straightforward, step-by-step process that can be used to clean environments and then make sure that the problems are not coming back. That's something that NORMI has been teaching on for a really long time. It's not just about solving a problem, but it's making sure that that problem won't come back. We're going to talk about personal protection equipment options and what specific things you can do to make sure that you're protected. Some of those pieces of equipment are becoming difficult to get a hold of. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Minimizing liability. What risks do you have and how do you mitigate those risks in this kind of environment? Selecting products, we're going to talk a little bit about that and give you some direction on what kinds of products are out there that we think will work and solve some of the problems that we're dealing with. And then we're going to talk a little bit about where we go from here in terms of some training that we've got for you as we move forward. So as we talk about this, when we talk about what we know, as I said, we're not really interested in giving you a lot of information about stuff that everybody else is talking about, Fox News, CNN, Rachel Maddow, whoever they are, with all of the latest current numbers. Truth is, if we gave you numbers today, tomorrow they'd be different. So what we want to talk about is we want to talk about a couple of things that we know, and I think generally the public, if they don't know, they should know about this virus and the transmission of this virus. So this article that you see, Air Purification and Coronavirus, on the left-hand side, is an article that I wrote last week and was published in Clean Facts. And when it was published in Clean Facts, the editing manager of Clean Facts was so excited about this article because he said everybody's talking about surfaces and surface cleaning, but nobody's talking about the air. And what was coincidental was that I wrote the article, and then just a couple of days later, which was I think Wednesday of last week, it was found out, or at least it was announced publicly, that the coronavirus could sustain viability in the air for up to 3 hours. There's been a lot of debates about that, and Mark and I talked a little bit yesterday and today about that. Mark, what had you read that you had asked me about in regards to this only alive in the air for 10 seconds or 10 minutes or whatever it was?
Well, there have been a number of different things. One of the most recent is from Stanford Hospital Board, and it was an internal message that went out speaking specifically about these airborne pathogens and their fast precipitation to the ground. However, some of these studies have been done in clinical settings where you don't have airborne particulate to be concerned about, and the attachment between the particulate and things like a cough or a sneeze or something of that nature. So it's something that we know we need to be cognizant of because we're dealing with a white room situation versus reality. So bringing some of that up is important for us to do today.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because if you think about something being viable, a microbe being viable in the air, or being viable that long for a couple of hours, I think what they're talking about is they're talking about submicron particles that are going to continue to float around in the air and possibly carry this virus. So it's not about just whether it drops to the floor, it's about, as we used to say, on a magic carpet ride and being carried around in the environment. I was telling Mark the illustration that we use in class is when I'm teaching, if I were to sneeze, I might not hit that person in the back of the classroom, but if I sneezed and that got on some submicron particle and she sucked that down into her lungs, then all of a sudden tomorrow she's got the same kind of problems I've got. So the point is that in terms of talking about it being airborne, is that it's undeniable that any kind of microbe it doesn't have wings, but any kind of microbe can become airborne. And so if you've got a sanitization solution that's going to work, it's got to include some type of dressing the air. And then, of course, we know it's on surfaces, and we talk a lot about transmission, contact transmission. And one of the ways that we deal with that is by keeping those surfaces clean. How do you do that? There's a couple of ways to do that. We want to talk about that in our sanitization protocol. But I guess the key is this third point, and that's that we want to take a holistic solution answer to this problem. We don't want to just, there is no silver bullet. There's not one thing that you can do that solves the problem. You've got to do multiple things. And as we say in our indoor air quality classes, it's a multifaceted problem which requires a multi-strategic solution. And that's the way we approach this. And that's why I think, and Mark feels the same way I do about this, this is why we're so comfortable with this sanitization protocol, because we think it does cover all the bases: the air, the surfaces, the ongoing contamination, the soil load, a lot of those kinds of things that a lot of people are talking about, but they're talking about it in pieces and not as a kind of a holistic approach. The norming sanitization protocol, and here it is in real simple terms. For those of you who are normie members, you're familiar with the normie professional practices. You see that laid out on the left-hand side. We wrote these normie professional practices as best practices to support the Florida licensing law. It's now been accepted, and we teach it now in District of Columbia, New York, Louisiana, and Texas. Document, you'll notice that it says these are general standards and practices, minimum requirements based on insurable practices. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But here, if you read the document, you would see something in a lot of legalese. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to just break it down very simply and say, here's the 6 steps that we think fit into or overlay that sanitization protocol to make it easy to understand how we would go about cleaning surface. So, first of all, Mark, you want to talk about 1 and 2?
I do, and let me set the stage for this a little bit. One thing that we need to discern between as we get started here in this protocol is the difference between cleaning and then disinfecting or applying some sort of an antimicrobial solution after the surface is cleaned to a surface. The first stage of anything, whether it be mold remediation or whether we're talking about cleaning surfaces from contamination in the case of this protocol, has to do with creating a surface that is absolutely clean and dust-free. That is absolute to remove the soil load and contamination from that surface. And so you're going to notice that number 1 here says fog to knock down airborne contaminants. This would go back to what we were previously talking about, and that is if you are going to remove that particulate from the air, and if you're going to create an efficient protocol, then a fogging solution with a cleaner that would knock that particulate down to the surfaces, followed by the wipe down and removal of both that particulate that's from the air and that contamination that is on the surface is the absolute most efficient way to do it. Okay. Now, one thing that you want to be thinking about in that fogging is that it can't just be a fog to knock that particulate down, but you need enough of that cleaning solution on the surfaces so that when you do that wipe down, it has penetrated through the soil load to the surface to allow for that suspension and removal of contamination on the surface. So the more contamination on the surface, the heavier that fogging should be, and vice versa. But the idea is to penetrate, lift, suspend, and remove any contaminations that are any contaminants that are on the surface from the surface to begin.
You know, and Mark, it's funny because in our classes, specifically with mold, although this fits with microbes as well, there are a lot of companies out there that are fogging and walking away. And I think the question has always been asked, well, what do you do with the debris? And certainly in the mold world, you want it all picked up because it's an allergen. And I think that the point is that you still want to remove the soil load. And if you can do that and you can create a clean environment by wiping down those surfaces, then you're going to have a clean environment onto which you can put protectant products as well, antimicrobial products. So this is really kind of the first step, and it's more than just fogging and walking away.
Yeah, that's right. We see 2 errors going on here. People aren't spending a lot of time thinking about cleaning because this idea of killing is so prevalent right now, and it's desired so much. But the cleaning aspect has to be had because without it, it negates the efficacy of antimicrobial solutions that you may want to apply to that surface. We're not creating this step out of thin air here. If you look at the directions of any antimicrobial, it will say pre-clean prior to use. So the reason we're talking about this in using this word cleaning is that it is what we're doing. We are cleaning these surfaces, but also when you go to the product selection side of things, you're going to want to make sure that you are using a product for the purpose of cleaning, because many disinfectants, many antimicrobials are not actually formulated with the surfactants and wetting agents to give you the cleaning capacity that you may be looking for. So in your mind, you might want to separate out a good cleaner from a good antimicrobial and or disinfectant to begin with, because they're not all created equally.
And we're going to underscore that two-step process a little bit later on, because this is something that's one of the most important things that we need to be thinking about is when we're using chemistries, it's using them correctly and using them in this two-step process, cleaning and then protecting, or washing and waxing, which we'll talk about in a second. So 3, 4, and 5 have to do with what most people think in terms of air quality. 3 is recommending where necessary that the HVAC system become cleaned, because HVAC systems can be a harbor for all kinds of microbial media, not only mold, but also microbes growing in the media of the filter, growing into the air conditioning system around the A-coil, growing on the interior ductwork. So a lot of places where it can grow. So that's a recommendation which might need to be addressed. And then, of course, number 4 is establishing this IAQ management process, which includes air filtration and air purification equipment. And the reason we recommend those, as we will talk about later this week, if you'll be happy to attend our class on products at the end of the week, the point is that we want to talk about air purification technologies that are proactive from the source of the machine, whether it's an HVAC system or a freestanding unit, is actually going out and keeping the surfaces clean. And we always tell people about this. What's interesting is most of the testing that's been done on a lot of these air purification technologies that are very proactive, and this has been going on for a really long time, is rather than drawing the pollution to the solution, we're taking the solution to the pollution. And if I can prove that I'm cleaning off the surfaces by testing with an air purifier, I'm keeping the surfaces clean. What is it doing between the air purifier and that surface? And of course, it's cleaning the air. And so you've got air purification technologies and passive filtration. You want to use both. It's not just about one or the other. And then the 5th point here is the installation of fresh air makeup. Fresh air makeup is the idea, of course, it's in every commercial environment, but most residences don't have fresh air makeup. I actually have it in my house. It was designed in my house because I'm an indoor guy, and I know how important it is to dilute contaminants and to bring fresh air in to the environment, which makes air purification technologies work better. It makes the air conditioning system work better. It gives you a better comfort level. A lot of those things have to do with enhancing the effectiveness of the equipment that you put in place. And then Mark, number 6, that's kind of in your realm there.
Yeah, so if I could maybe state it this way, every evening that I go home from the office, I return to a kitchen that has been cleaned from the previous day, and the countertops look wonderful until we finish cooking and until we finish picking up the dinner table, right? And what I would say here is that we can establish an initial level of cleanliness. We can establish these indoor air quality management processes and systems. But if we don't have a recurring cleaning program that returns those surfaces and maintains those that surface level of cleanliness, then we don't have a program overall. So what we're beginning to see, thankfully, with contractors, is they are beginning to understand this and offer ongoing cleaning services to both residential, commercial properties. We already are seeing mandates governmentally where they are asking for these regular cleaning solutions on a every 2 or 3 day basis. But we see within residential and commercial settings such as offices, these types of re-cleanings, if you will, happening on a 3 to 4 week process at a minimum.
Well, and at the risk of sounding like a businessman, incorporating scheduled maintenance and ongoing relationship with the customer to help them understand this process, that it's not just about cleaning it today, but it's making sure that it's going to stay clean, is going to build you a much more solid business. And I think in a lot of ways set you apart from a lot of the competitors out there that are just one in and out, do it and then leave and go to the next job. So that's something to think about, and it's definitely part of our sanitization protocol. The next thing that we want to talk about is personal protection equipment options, and I'll just run over the top 3 points pretty quickly here. Of course, you need to be OSHA trained. Personal protection equipment is extremely important. You're dealing with highly contaminated areas, and you want to make sure that you've protected those points of entry. You've been trained on how to use OSHA or personal protection equipment, use the right kind for the right products. which Mark is going to talk about for just a second. You want to make sure that you've got a medical test, that you don't have any facial hair that's messing up the seal of the mask. And those kinds of things are just basic fundamental things that we do in all of our initial training, and something that you need to be aware of. Don't take this for granted. If you were around after 9/11, you know that there are people today that are still paying the price for not wearing personal protection equipment while they were cleaning up that mess. And the same things happened here in New Orleans. There are people that are dealing with respiratory issues now as a result of their efforts to help in 2005 with that disaster, because they weren't wearing personal protection equipment. So, Mark.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Okay.
Yeah.
When it comes to the chemistries that you may be selecting, the applications, and then the PPE that coincides with those, I want you to think about three things. You've got your botanicals, you've got your organics, and you've got your inorganics when it comes to the chemistries. And you're going to select your PPE, specifically your respiration, based upon those three types of chemistries. So think about botanicals, organics, and inorganics. And let me give you an example of each of those, or several examples of each of those. If we're talking about botanicals, many times those are going to be your thymol-based phenolics, right? When we're talking about your organics, you're going to be thinking about your quaternary ammonium chlorides, your alcohols, and the other phenolics that would fall under a company like a Contact or something of that nature. And then when you're talking about your inorganics, you're talking about your peroxides, your acids such as your peroxyacetic acids, your sodium hypochlorites, and your ammonias, okay? And we want to see, it's necessary, I don't know if I could make it more stringent than this. It is absolutely necessary to pair the right respiration with the chemistry that you're selecting. Now, with your botanicals, while you might want to use an N95 mask, of course, for the application that you're in, that is, you're cleaning up potentially surfaces that are contaminated with viral or bacterial organics. The PPE would fall to the application as compared to the botanical solution itself, because botanicals, for all intents and purposes, are not harmful to human beings. I could, if I wanted to, drink a botanical antimicrobial or botanical solution today, and I wouldn't suffer any ill effects other than a bad taste in my mouth. Whereas when I get into the quaternary ammonium chlorides, the alcohols, and the phenolics, which are your organics, now you want to select an organic vapor cartridge for those types of products, and you want to make sure that that is marrying up with your application, okay? Now, one thing that we developed last year was a safety guide that also pairs this with what we call incidental exposure, direct exposure, and prolonged exposure. And on Friday, we can make that available to everyone. So if you are in these situations where it is incidental, direct, or prolonged in nature, you know exactly how to marry up the PPE there. Right now, let's stay very general and talk about the specifics of attaching PPE to the botanicals, organics, and inorganics. Now, when you get over to the peroxides, peroxyacetic acids, sodium hypochlorites, and ammonias, you want to marry up your multi-gas, multi-vapor combo cartridges with those products. If not, you will definitively suffer, and your technicians will definitively suffer from exposure to not only the chemicals, but the vapors from those chemicals, and not only reduce productivity, but maybe some longer lasting effects. So if we can go through that one more time, botanicals, marry those to your N95 mask based upon application. For your organics, such as quaternary ammonium chlorides, alcohols, and phenolics, marry those up with your organic vapor cartridges. And for peroxides, peroxyacetic acids, sodium hypochlorites, and ammonias, use a multi-gas, multi-vapor combo cartridge for your respirators.
So one of the things that we've done that I think is really exciting for us, in January, we introduced an updated version of our certified biocide application course. I've got it listed there on the bottom of the slide. I just want to encourage you, if you're interested in knowing about quats and silated quats and oxidizers, some of these terms that Mark used so freely and so comfortable with, if you'd like to understand what that means and how those work, and then how to apply those, that's what that class is all about. So I'm just going to recommend that to you. It's called the Certified Biocide Applicator. It is a great course that was scientists in the last 2 years, and it's a super course in understanding these basics on chemistries. Unfortunately, we're in a world where we have a lot of litigation, and I can tell you, just as you know, that somebody's going to be trying to figure out who's to blame for this coronavirus and who messed up their house. And so there's always this potential for liability anytime you're in business and anytime you're working with chemistries. So just wanted to hit this kind of lightly, but I wanted to tell you that there's a couple of protections that you have built in if you're in business. And one of them is to follow specific guidelines. We've shown you some. We have the norming professional practices in place for that purpose. But if you follow specific guidelines, you're actually shifting the liability away from you to the organization that wrote those guidelines. When you look at the norming professional practices, it very specifically says insurable practices. And this reason is because there's an insurance company that stands behind it. When you do what you're supposed to do, they're going to protect you. They're going to give you the protection that you need as the professional in that environment. So it is going to mitigate your risk. Everyone has a risk, but when you're in business or you're working for an employer, your job is to protect that employer, and the employer's job is to protect his business and the owners of the business, whoever they are. The way to do that is to mitigate that risk by making sure that all of your guys are well trained, they're certified, they're all speaking the same language. And that's what that concept is behind insurable practices. I always tell the story. This is so easy to understand for me as a general contractor. When I was working in the construction industry, I would not pay a roofer for a project that he did on Friday. I wouldn't pay him on the payday unless he had a proof of insurance for his workers' comp. Why? Because I didn't want to pay his workers' comp. I was shifting the liability to him. And that's the concept here, is to make sure that you're using the right kind of guidelines, that you're following those guidelines, that you're staying strictly by how you've been trained, and make sure that all of your guys are well trained and certified. We just created this last year a brand new membership called the Firm Membership, where mold workers can be trained for free and online. So they don't even have to leave the office, which sounds like a pretty good idea now, doesn't it? They can actually take all their training right online. And so that's what we're all about, is trying to help the industry understand how to protect themselves and their clients and their employees, because that's what it's all about, is making sure that we've mitigated those risks. So Mark, you wanted to talk a little bit about these protecting the products, but specifically this two-step process, which you mentioned earlier, but I think this more graphically kind of describes that, and probably a good way to kind of, put in a capsule this discussion.
Yeah, that's right. So going back to cleaning and soil load removal, and as I mentioned before, many antimicrobial solutions don't necessarily have wetting agents or surfactants in them because they are meant to be used once the surface is clean. So they, by design, don't need them. Now, that's not a blanket statement. Some of them are built as cleaners and antimicrobials, or cleaners and disinfectants. So that is not an overall generalization, but generally speaking, you want to separate those in your own mind, because you want to have a very good cleaner to remove the soil load. You want to have then a very good antimicrobial or surface protectant afterward. Okay, now I'm going to dial this down into some specifics for you real quick. Beyond the cleaners having surfactants and wetting agents, what those ought to be able to achieve is not only penetrate that soil load, but also suspend that soil load, which prevents redeposition of that soil load to the surface. So when you look at a car, for example, and you notice that you're cleaning that with a cleaning agent, the reason that surfactant has bubbles, right, is that gives it something to attach to and suspend it so it doesn't redeposit on that surface. So cleaning involves removal. Now, when we go over to the waxing side here, right, the antimicrobial or surface protection, now you get into several different types of chemistries. You have minimum risk antimicrobials, okay, that we can go into at a later date in very fine specifics. You have EPA registered antimicrobials. You have coatings and surface protectants with that what are called treated articles. That means that there is a EPA registered antimicrobial paired with that coating or protectant to prevent the growth of bacteria, funguses, viruses, etc., on the coating film. And then one other category that you might want to think about here is mandates. We are finding that many governmental agencies are expressing mandates where they want certain percentages of active ingredients used. And that's a little bit of a gray area right now because you have to be careful in terms of what you say and claim versus what an agency is looking for in terms of just pure performance and cleaning. I didn't mean to bring that back over to the cleaning side, but I realized when I looked at my notes here, I didn't hit the mandates. So not to confuse anything, but back on the cleaning side, you're going to notice that many government agencies, for those agencies and public buildings and facilities, are going to mandate something like a 1.5% sodium hypochlorite solution for the purpose of cleaning. They are not using that term cleaning by accident, because if they were to say a 1.5% solution for disinfecting, now they would expose themselves and others to the need for